Get debate. We're looking at the situation in Syria and whether or not there are going to be peace talks on Wednesday in Geneva on Syria. This amid jostling over preconditions or no. The Iranians say no preconditions. The international community says yes, the build-up towards a transitional government. With us to talk about it, longtime Syrian dissident Haytham Manna. Also with us, Emma Suleiman, formerly spokesperson of the Syrian National Council. From London, Olivier Guitta, director of research at the Henry Jackson Society. And from Cairo, Financial Times correspondent Borzou Daragahi. Now, in the build-up to Wednesday's talks, Bashar al-Assad, the president, showing his best face this Monday. He's evacuated civilians and led aid into the Damascus area Yarmouk Palestinian refugee camp. That's a camp that was besieged by government forces for months. The president also back to granting interviews to the international communities, interviews where Bashar al-Assad has put his spin on what's wrong right now.
The Geneva Conference needs to put pressure on countries that are exporting terrorism by sending terrorists, money and weapons to terrorist organizations, especially Saudi Arabia and Turkey. And of course, the Western countries that provide political cover for these terrorist organizations. This is the most important decision or result that the Geneva Conference could produce.
Emma Suleiman?
I just can't stand his voice. I can't stand what he says. Basically, he talks about terrorism and exporting terrorism. I mean, he is responsible for every destruction that Syria that had in the last 3 years and in the last 4 years. Let's put it this way. Let's say Syria moved from importing terrorism. Thanks to Assad, who let out Al-Qaeda and other Salafist jihadists from who were prisoners in the early days of the revolution, so they can, establish these radical brigades, etc. And now Syria is actually producing terrorism and becoming an exporter. I mean, at the moment they are in Syria, but they'll eventually, be off to Iraq and all the neighboring countries, and this is because of him and because of the inaction of the international community. I mean, we have warned the international community since 3 years. If there is no action taking in Syria, this will turn into not only Iraq, it will turn worse than Afghanistan, and this is what's going on. And I think now the whole media is only talking about the jihadists, which are like in France there are 200 and some. In Syria, their best case scenario, the foreigners are about 15 to 20,000, and at the same time, hundreds and thousands are dying in Syria on monthly basis, and we only focus on the issue of the jihad. And now, if you talk to anyone in Europe, their first response will be, Assad is the nice one because his opposition are the jihadists. But no one knows that the Syrian never called for jihadists or foreigners to come into Syria. And I think this should be addressed clearly from the Syrian opposition themselves, that we did not ask for any jihadists to come to Syria, and we don't want them in Syria.
All right, Emma Suleiman, you're correct in saying that it is the Western-born jihadists that are grabbing the headlines. It was front-page news in this Monday's Daily Telegraph about homegrown jihadists who will then be returning home from Syria. Over the weekend, it was here in France, the growing number of those homegrown jihadists off to Syria to hone their skills, which France's Interior Minister says is a top concern. Josh Vardy told us about this earlier.
This is the last photo of Hakim, showing him in Syria. Instead of going back to school after the winter holidays, the teenager took a flight to Turkey using his father's credit card.
He's good-natured and calm. He had no links to those kind of groups in any way. He didn't go to the mosque or anything like that. He doesn't speak Arabic, nor can he write it.
A good student and class representative, the 15-year-old left with another pupil from the same school.
These are two very different profiles. For one of the students, everyone was taken by surprise. We were stunned. For the other student, it's a lot more complicated. He had a more chaotic background.
According to other schoolmates, the two friends isolated themselves and Hakeem started to change.
He stopped listening to music, for example. He'd only listen to chants from the Quran. One day he gave away all his belongings. We don't know if he gave them away or sold them. He sold lots.
The boy was last contacted on social networks 3 days ago.
I told him to come back to France and to think of his family first. That's the most important thing. And he said, "Don't worry, I'll get a reward at the end."
As the civil war enters its third year in Syria, more and more young Europeans are joining the rebellion.
And again, Olivier Guitta, this is the story that's been making news here in France this Monday, the story of underage jihadists, also the interior minister saying that if you add up those that are going to Syria, those that are there and those that are coming back, they number 700. When you hear Emma Suleiman express outrage at the fact that that is the top story, what's your reaction?
Listen, I totally agree with Emma. Assad has been very skillful in presenting the conflict in a black and white framework whereby it's either him or the jihadists. I would put to you that the opposition was not good into saying there's a third way. What I think is happening as far as the headlines, yes, the sheer numbers of Westerners going to Syria make it the highest number of jihadists ever to reach one theater of war, much more than Afghanistan, much more than Bosnia, much more than Iraq. And so that's why the Western security services are rightly so concerned. The issue that you have, and that's why selfishly it comes back to Western democracies, is when those people are going to come back radicalized and with a much broader sophistication and skills, they could be potential attackers on their homeland because of what happened and because of the West inaction. You know, back in July, August, when there was this whole debate about intervening or not in Syria after the chemical attack, I pointed out that by watching those images of young kids dying from the chemical attack, the jihadists would out of a feat just getting people to come to their fore and making the case that the Western didn't intervene because they don't care about the Muslim lands, they don't care about their Muslim brothers, and that people within those democracies have to take responsibility and come to fight the jihad in Syria.
But then it brings up the question that we have in the strap for you there, Olivier. Is it the top priority now to oust Assad, like John Kerry says, or is the top priority to oust the jihadists?
Both of it, because obviously Geneva is not going to get anything done as far as ousting the jihadists, because it's a phenomenon that has been growing, and the fact that it's very easy to reach Syria is much more of an issue than it was before. The fact that the West didn't take part into any meaningful action on the ground is making them really vulnerable to what's happening. They have lost their fates. The fates, of the Syrian people is not in the hands of the West. By not intervening one way or another, the West has given way to other countries such as Iran, Syria, Assad, Saudi Arabia, Qatar, to decide what's going to happen.
Do you agree with that, Borzou Daragahi?
Well, I mean, it's easy to blame everything on the U.S., but I would just posit this, that even if the U.S. and other powers were to stop supporting the Syrian opposition and the Syrian rebellion to the extent that, even to the small extent that they're supporting them now, does anyone really think this is going to end? Does anyone really think? I would say that the level of brutality and injustice that was inflicted by Bashar al-Assad's regime has created an effect which can't just be stopped. I think that what Bashar al-Assad has done, the crimes that he has committed against his own people, are going to have a reaction. And part of that reaction is young, idealistic people, whether in the West or in other Arab countries, looking at the horror that is happening in Syria and wanting to get involved in some way and wanting to defend these poor people. As the previous speaker mentioned, these people who died of chemical weapons, basically gassed to death by Bashar al-Assad. They want to do something about this. So whether or not John Kerry or the U.S. administration or anyone else gets involved in this or does something about it, this jihadi problem will grow unless Bashar al-Assad is overthrown.
And Borzou, we're getting word of a double suicide attack at a border crossing with Turkey in Idlib province. At least 16 killed, according to the Syrian Observatory for Human Rights. And this is attributed to another dimension of this, which is the fight between jihadists and more moderate rebels. Where is that going now?
Well, I think that to some extent, the rebels are kind of smartly trying to rebrand themselves as the ones that are on the leading edge against al-Qaeda. So trying to undermine Bashar al-Assad's argument that it's either me or the jihadis. The rebels are saying we are fighting against the jihadis. On January 3rd, they launched a multifaceted assault on the most extreme jihadi group, the Islamic State of Iraq and the Levant, known as ISIS, very much so popularly. And they are continuing this fight. But it's not just for PR purposes, not just for undermining Bashar al-Assad's argument that he's the anti-jihadi crusader. This particular group has a very dark, bleak vision that just does not fit with what the Syrian revolution was about. It's even more extreme than other Islamic groups such as Jabhat al-Nusra. And so they had to deal with this group one way or another at some point.
Some of you, of course, disagreeing with neither nor. We have one comment here on Twitter. The West must face the reality. Its true enemy in Syria is the Islamists. Haytham, Manna, your thoughts on this? You heard a minute ago Olivier Guitta say that it's the U.S.'s inaction, refusal to intervene, that has led to this power vacuum that jihadists have pounced upon.
It's not only the inaction. And I don't think that the action was useful. I think that the problem was the strategy of the so-called friends of the Syrian people, because their strategy from the beginning was, we must finish with Assad by any way. And the politic of the Gulf countries and Turkey was clear. The border open to help Syrian by jihadists. Their name was not jihadist at that time. Free Army is beautiful, and these foreigners which help Free Army can reinforce the Syrian revolution. And this politics with the fatwa of Qaradawi and all these religions from Saudi Arabia, Qatar, and Egypt at that time pushed many people to go to Syria. And we have now more than 25,000 people in Syria.
Okay, so you've said from the outset...
The responsibility is a common one. Assad released the prisoners of Sidnaya in May 2011. And these three people of these people are now the head of the Islamic Front. And in the same time, he shut the eyes about the north of the country.
All right, but
he opened the door to give a bad example of the Syrian struggle.
You've argued from the get-go against sending weapons, saying that it's not going to be a crisis you can solve with guns. Do you still feel that way?
I think that everyone in Syria, every honest citizen in Syria say today that militarization was in the interest of the regime and was the most important element of the destruction of what we have today.
Right, but pragmatically today, what do you do?
I think, first of all, the Security Council must give directly and immediately a resolution to put all foreigners in Syria, from Hezbollah to these of Zawahiri and others, and your European, to put them out of the legitimacy and out of the legal situation.
They can't anymore.
They can't do it, and when they do it, I can ask Erdogan to shut the border.
First,
we can ask the Saudi. Yesterday we had a very important change in the media in Saudi Arabia. With a program, we heard many mothers spoke about their child killed in Syria. And now in Saudi Arabia, there is a movement against this sheikh, which gave a fatwa, these Wahhabis.
This is excellent, but this is
not only
the
excellent.
point.
We need a resolution, a clear resolution.
All right.
And people who are against now, I think, are complice.
No, but a serious resolution, resolution against Hezbollah at the same time. Do you actually believe that Russia will not veto?
No. We asked the Russian. They asked us not to give the name of any part with a resolution, and the Americans the same thing. Listen,
let me expand.
Both of them accepted, and up to now, they didn't do anything.
Emma Suleiman.
They accepted for no Syrian foreigners.
Okay.
This is the formula.
Emma Suleiman.
And it's a very good one.
In my opinion, the saying that the Syrian problems, I mean, it's only because of the Western and Saudi-backed opposition has nothing to do with reality. The reality is it was a popular revolution since day one. I mean, I think you are totally aware of the fact that Assad thought that we were all backed up by Saudi, Turkey, etc., but that wasn't true. Later on, of course, when he called for the saint war between Shia and Sunnis, so it turned into a saint war, and this is how we saw Hezbollah, Iraqi, and Afghani troops, and these are as radical as the Sunni. Okay, so both radicals. They founded a jihadi Disneyland. Let's put it this way. Now, the key problem, if you really want to stop this from growing, you have to cure the core of the problem, which is Assad himself. Issuing a resolution with Assad in power would not resolve the problem, because the people who started this revolution will continue. I agree with you. The Islamic Front is Zahran Alloush is a Salafi himself, yes. And he's not a moderate, right? But you have many moderates who joined the fighters. Yes. I've been to Syria myself. I've been in the heart of
today. All the problems stay. You must take in consideration that the concentration of all our problem in this Superman called Bashar al-Assad, which for me is really a crazy president and not
Thank you
really
for highlighting that.
Yes, I think that concentration, our saying that everything behind it, Bashar al-Assad,
I'm not saying he's behind everything.
We shut our eyes about the realities.
No, I'm not
which
saying
give us a real catastrophe in Syria now. We must stop this discourse, and we try to find a solution to our country.
Yeah, this is
and
what we're doing.
when we look to the problem with the money which arrive from these
Iran?
so-called friends of the Syrian people here,
and the friends of Assad
the allies of Assad there, to stop arming from all sides, and to stop the presence of no Syrian fighters. You have today 50,000 no Syrian fighters in Syria able to fight for more than 10 years.
Okay, so this is all happening in the context, again, the build-up to this Geneva II conference at the end of last week. The U.S. Secretary of State was trying to cajole and coax the Turkey-based Syrian opposition into attending Geneva II. John Kerry insisting that the ultimate goal was still to oust Assad.
Nobody's going to be fooled. We're not going to be fooled by this process. So, you know, Foreign Minister Lavrov has stated they are supporting the Geneva I communique, and the government has to come and negotiate around that communique. And since Russia is one of the primary benefactors of the Assad regime, we believe the Russians have a high stake in helping to make certain that Assad understands exactly what the parameters of this negotiation are.
And the parameters being that he leaves. Borzou Daragahi, in view of the discussion we've just heard here in the studio and what John Kerry said, do you think the Americans really want to first oust Assad, or do you think that this is rhetoric?
Well, I think that would be the best solution. I think that most experts and most independent analysts would say that the best possible solution at this point for Syria would be a ceasefire, an end to the fighting, opening up of borders and checkpoints to allow humanitarian relief to get through, and some kind of transitional process as described in Geneva I or any other kind of process that would lead to the removal of Bashar al-Assad, his family that has ruled the country for 40 years, and lead towards some kind of pluralistic structure. That is the only hope at this point for the country. Because if you look at the situation on the ground now, if all of a sudden Bashar al-Assad, through some kind of violent move, were removed from office, I have a fear that Syria could turn into Afghanistan circa 1992, where you have different militias essentially fighting each other for control of turf.
Olivier Guitta?
Yes, I would point out as well that there's the issue of chemical weapons and biological weapons that has not been raised to the fold. And I think John Kerry would be really behind getting the chemical weapons issue out the door before he sees Assad out, because he doesn't want the jihadists taking control of chemical, biological weapons. And that's something that everybody should keep in mind, because that's the agreement that was really the tipping point, if you remember, of the crisis, and that took both the Americans and the West out of the conundrum of intervening or not.
Haytham, Manna, right now we're at a point where after those chemical weapons came into being, it did help to concentrate the minds. It did bring the US and the Russia to discuss together more, which they hadn't before. Would you say that this moment where there is the chance for talks is fading?
Not completely, but I must tell you something. When Mr. Kerry speaks about ceasefire, all of us know that it's a very complicated operation now. We are not in the 30th of June 2012. And now, to ceasefire in Syria, you need the agreement of more than 25 parties which are not concerned by Geneva II. And it will not be possible. For that, we must concentrate our effort, first of all, to rechange alliances inside Syria. For example, up to now, the Free Army worked together with Daesh, with the state
of
ISIS.
Yeah.
ISIS, and with al-Nusra against the Kurdish groups. It's impossible to see that in a time when all the Syrian parties from the opposition, the Arabs one, and foreigners, fight against Daesh.
All right, so it's a skeptical look at what's going to happen there.
You know, we must have a new alliances and new position for many groups inside the country.
And bring them into the fold of the discussion.
After a political rapprochement between groups who are for a political solution and groups who are against.
All right, so it sounds
it
sounds like in your view that
it's not the case.
It's too early in your view for talks. Haytham, Manna, I want to thank you. I want to thank Emma Suleiman. I want to thank Borzou Daragahi for joining us from Cairo, and Olivier Guitta for being with us in London. Thank you for joining us here for the France 24 debate.